Hey everyone, and welcome back to my video series on how to build a Discord bot in Python. Over the last, 15 or so videos, we've created our bot, we've gotten a database set up, we've created all of our data classes, set up the functionality to change, update, delete data from those classes, and now we're finally here, we're at the step where we're going to compile everything and actually preview our full profile. So let's take a look at what that's going to look like. So here in Discord, if I type the preview command, you can see I've filled in all the information in the profile, so you can see all of the sections filled out instead of just the one that we've been working on. And then, this is the profile. This is the finished product that we're going to be creating today. But before we get started with actually compiling, there's one quality of life thing that I'd like to take care of. So if we run any of our commands, let's say the images status command here, before we didn't have a button here at the bottom that says close. Okay, so the issue that would arise is that when the user would invoke this command and they were complete and they'd uploaded their images or they've made changes to their details or what have you, then this message would just sit here and be done, and it would just wait for itself to die and time out, which is no way to live. So we've given the user a button here that will allow them to close the message that it's attached to, just to keep things neat and tidy, because that's a big pet peeve of mine, is Discord channels that are just dirty and just messages everywhere and you can't find anything. That's no good. So we want to make sure that this can be as clean as possible. So for all of our status views, we're going to add a button here that allows you to close the message. Okay, so that's what we're going to get started with, and then we're going to work on compiling our profile. Pretty exciting, huh? So let's get started. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to go into our common UI file, and down here at the bottom, under our confirm cancel view, we're going to create a button. Okay, and this button is going to be what we use to close the messages with. So let's just call it a close message button. Okay, and it'll be a regular button. And within the init, we don't need to take any parameters, but we do need to call the superclass as we usually do. And let's set the button style equal to buttonstyle.success, because we don't want to scare the user away from this button with a danger, with a red button. We don't want that. We want the user to feel comfortable pressing this button when they're all finished, like, okay, done, not, okay, close. So we want to say label equals close message. Disabled is going to be false. We always want this to be enabled. And then we want to set the row equal to 4. But why are we doing this? We've never set a row equal to 4, right? We've never even set one equal to 2 or 3. Well, setting this to 4 will mean that no matter what, it's always going to be at the bottom of the view, okay? So the view will automatically compress things and fill in blank rows, but ultimately, as long as you specify the rows in this style. So for instance, here we have row 4, and in other places we've defined like row 0 for our buttons, or when we did the paginator in the images, we defined row 1 as the default button row. And that's the behavior that we're taking advantage of here, is that it's going to sandwich those rows together, but ultimately this will still be the last row, the final row, the bottommost row in our view. Okay, so that's where we want the close button at all times. All right, now within our callback, we only need to do a couple of things. This is a pretty simple button. So first thing we want to do is we want to set self.view.value equal to true. Okay, so remember our frog views, to which this is going to always be attached, have a value that could be true. It could be none, but we're looking for some kind of positive value here to exit execution of the code within the view. Okay, so this is just kind of a safety precaution. There's no specific location that requires this to be true, but we do enough checks in our code against the value of the view that we don't want this to be a hang-up. Okay, so let's also set self.view.complete equal to true. For the same reasons. We check that frequently to make sure that the view was successfully interacted with. So since this button was clicked, we definitely want to make sure that the view was interacted with successfully. Okay, and because this is going to be closing the view, the whole message that we have it attached to, we want to make sure that self.view.close on complete is going to be equal to true, no matter what. We may have set that during the view instantiation, but we're double checking it here just to make sure, because the behavior that we're going to take advantage of requires this to be true. Okay, so first off, before we actually delete the message, let's send back a dummy interaction response. So interaction.response.editMessage with nothing in it. And then down here, we want to just say await self.view.stop. Right? And we'll put a type ignore so we don't get the squiggly. Oops. But keep in mind, this button could potentially, in the case of our images, be attached to a paginator, right? Because we want to make these buttons and these UI elements as versatile as possible. So we don't want to have a regular close message button and then like a close paginator button. Okay, that would be duplicated code. That would be silly to redefine it. So ultimately what we can do here is, because our paginators require us to use the cancel function and not the stop function, let's just check and see if this view, the view that this is attached to, is a paginator. Okay, so if is instance self.view paginator, which we'll need to import. So let's go up to the top and say from discord.ext.pages, we're going to import paginator like that. And then in the event that our view is a paginator, we actually want to say await self.view.cancel. Okay? And our froginator also has a close on complete attribute, right? We've created that. So ultimately, this behavior is still going to work. We're just calling a different method to invoke the deletion. Okay? So else, we can just say await self.view.stop. So if it's a paginator, we have to cancel it. But if it's a standard view, then we can just stop it. Either way, this is going to work. Okay, so now we have our close message button. Let's jump up here to all and make sure that we export it like that. Okay, and now let's drop it into the status views for each of our profile elements, okay? Each of our classes. So for at a glance, actually we need this in the UI, excuse me, at a glance UI, and I'm just going to search for status view. Nope, how about at a glance view? Okay, there we go. And let's just add the button right here so we can say close message button. Okay, easy enough. And now our at a glance view is going to have the option to close when we're done, or honestly at any point. Okay, so let's go into our details and we'll find the details status view, and we'll add a close message button to this as well. But we haven't imported it, so let's make sure that we do that. So here from .common, we'll import close message button. And no more squiggly, no more squiggly. Very good. And for images, we're going to do the same thing. And actually, let's add it to the additional image view as well, because when we're paginating through our images, we want a way to close the paginator, right? That's the whole point of this secondary functionality, is that we want to be able to attach it to a paginator. So let's make sure that we remember to do that. So self.addItem close message button, which we haven't imported here either. So let's spell it correctly and then import it from the top. So from .common, we'll do close message button. Okay. And then we also need the image status view. So where is that? Where is that? That is here. And we'll add a close message button here as well. Okay, last up is our personality. So here's our personality view right here. That was easy to find. Let's drop in a close message button at the end. Okay, success. So now we have our close message buttons attached to all of our sections. Let's really quickly go ahead and test that in Discord and make sure everything's working like we want it to. Okay, so let's do details first. Okay, looking good. Let's do personality. Excellent. We'll do images last. How about at a glance? Excellent. And then we'll do images. Okay, so first thing I want to do is I want to view our additional images. Make sure that the paginator close works. Okay, very good. And let's make sure that our standard images status will also delete. Okay, cool. So all of our messages are deleting properly, and we don't have any errors. This is excellent. So now we can start defining our compilation behavior for the profile. And to do that, we're going to open up our profile section class, okay? Our interface class. And right here, let's say under status, we're going to say def compile. And it's not going to take any parameters, and this is going to return us a tuple of any value, and we're going to put an ellipsis for the second value. Now the reason that we're putting an ellipsis, and let's import this as well, excuse me. So the reason that we're making this the return type is that we're going to use this function in each of our classes to return the formatted underlying data as needed for the final profile. So this could potentially return us maybe a string or an embed field, or honestly any number of embed fields. It just depends on what data is in the particular class we're working with. Okay, and we're going to raise a not implemented error, as we usually do. Okay, so let's jump into each of our sections, and let's close all these tabs, and let's jump into each of our sections and define that compile behavior. Okay, so we can start with details, and I'll do it right here under the status. And let's say def compile. And then let's look at our data points here. So ultimately, what we've got is a character name, a URL, a color, jobs, and rates. So 5 data points, right? And the only one of these data points that is actually going to need to be formatted in any way during the compilation is rates, right? Because it's its own field, it's its own section. Otherwise, the character name, URL, color, and jobs are all included as themselves. And they're already formatted. For instance, jobs is already formatted within the property. Okay, so that's going to return what we need already. So in our compile behavior, let's first define what we're getting back. Okay, so it's not going to be that. And let's import tuple from typing. And actually, this is getting a little long, so let's drop it down. We'll make this a vertical list. Like that. And my OCD is going crazy that that's not in the right order. There we go. Okay. So now down here, let's drop this down so we've got some more room. And in our tuple, what are we getting back from this? Well, we're going to be getting back the character name, which is an optional string. We're going to get back the URL, which is an optional string. We're getting back the color, which is an optional color. We're getting back the jobs, which is an optional string. And then we're finally getting back the rates, which is an optional embed field. Okay? And then this is pretty straightforward. So ultimately, the compile function is really just going to return all of the chunks of data in one call. So we want to just return, and we're going to open this, an open tuple, self.carename, and these are going to all be the properties, self.url, self.color, self.jobs. And then for our rates field, well, I don't want to just give back the string, right? I want to give back the actual field itself. So let's define a function that does that for us, okay? So we're going to call it rates field. No parameters, and it's going to return us an optional embed field, just like we're expecting. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is check to see if self.rates is NS. And if it is, I just want to return. Okay, we're not going to return anything. And that's going to allow us to check for whether we've returned anything at all within our compile behavior. Okay, this will make more sense as we start to put the profile together. But if self.rates is not NS, which means they've set a value for their rates, let's return an embed field. And for the name, we're going to say an F string, and I want to go into our emojis class really quick, our emojis enum, and let's define a couple more values. So these are going to be used in the compilation of the various fields. And I need to define 3 here. So the first one I want to define is envelope, which is a partial emoji dot from string. And this is going to be this one here, the envelope with a heart. And then we're going to define eyes, which equals partial emoji dot from string. And in quotes, we're going to put these eyeballs. And finally, flying money equals partial emoji dot from string, and into the quotes, let's put money with wings. Okay, so that's all that we need from our emojis for now. So we can close this again. And into the name of our rates field, we can just say bot emojis dot flying money dot value, and then double underscore rates to make it underlined, and then we'll put another emoji here, bot emojis dot flying money dot value. Whoops. And then for the value of this field, I want to put an open parenthesis. This is going to be string concatenation, not a tuple. And the first one is going to be an F string of self.rates with a new line after it. And then we want to make a draw separator, okay? Because if we look back at Discord, all of our sections are divided by a separator, and we have to manually add that, okay? So let's jump back in here, and after self.rates, let's drop in an F string with draw separator and an extra of 15. Okay? And then finally, it will not be inline. So this is false. Okay? Just like that. Oh, and this should not have a comma. Okay, there we go. Much better. So now we can call the rates field right up here in our compile function. So here we can just say self.rates field. Okay, and this is going to return all of the underlying data points within details. Very cool. So let's go over to personality. That's an easy one to take care of next. Okay, and we've got, let's see here, we've got our fields defined already. Geez, we are on fire. Let's make this one above the likes field and below status. So we'll def compile. And since all of our data points in the personality class are actually, they turn out as embed fields, we're just going to return 4 of those, which is pretty simple. So let's drop this down because it does take a little more room. And we'll say optional embed field as the return, and we're going to do this 4 times. Okay, because that's what we're returning from this class, just 4 embed fields. So let's go up here and import tuple from typing. And this one's getting a little long as well, so I'll drop it down just like that. Okay, so now for the compile behavior, what do we want to return? Well, this is actually super simple. This is even simpler than the details. So let's return a tuple, and we're going to say self.likes field, and we're going to drop in section type, section type dot likes, okay? But that's only going to work if we have a value in our likes attribute, right? If they've set their likes. So we need to add a conditional here saying if self.likes is not ns, else none. Okay, so ultimately we're going to return this field if there is a field to be formatted. Otherwise, just return none. And we can duplicate this and set it to dislikes and set this to dislikes as well. Okay, let's also return self.personality field if self.personality is not ns, else none. And then finally, let's call this function that we wrote earlier called compile about me. That literally simply makes our embedded message if it exists. So that's perfect. That's exactly what we need. So we can just say self.compile about me. Now the issue is that I said 4 embed fields, but that's incorrect. This last one is an optional embed, just regular embed, not a field. Okay? Cool. So there's our compile behavior for personality. We are on a roll. Let's jump over to images because it's going to be the easiest of the last 2. And then let's say let's say here above modify caption, and below our properties, we're going to def compile. And this is going to return us a tuple with an optional string for the thumbnail, an optional string for the main image, and an optional embed field with all the additional images. Okay? So we can just return self.thumbnail, self.mainImage, and self.compile additional. Okay? Just like that. And the thing that I do want to change is that while I was testing, I realized that I made a mistake here in our properties in the images class. Okay, so for our thumbnail and main image, we're returning the underlying data point, or NS, right? But we don't want to return NS here. We want to return embed.empty. Okay, so we're essentially saving ourselves a step down the line when we drop these bits directly into the profile. Okay, so we don't have to say if the value is NS, then make it embed.empty. We're just going to save ourselves a step and say if there's no value in the underlying data point, just make it the embed.empty sentinel value instead of the one that we created. Okay, super easy. And in that way, we can just return this instead of saying self.thumbnail, if self.thumbnail is not NS, else, embed.empty. We saved ourselves a step there. Okay, so hopefully it makes sense what we did. Now, our at a glance is going to take a little bit more work because it's got some fancy data points, right? And ultimately, all of these data points here get compiled into one embed field. Okay, so let's set that. Let's put that again down here under status, and we're going to say def compile. And this is just going to, instead of a tuple, this is going to return us an optional embed field. Okay. So now this behavior is actually my favorite because it's kind of fun just piecing all of this together, seeing what the user did and didn't enter, and then adjusting accordingly. And before we define the compile behavior, I want to define one more function up here. And it's going to be called _raw string. Okay, and this is going to return us a string no matter what. Now, you'll see why we're doing this in a second, but I'm going to define the compilation behavior within the raw string, and then I'm going to check that raw string in compile to see what to actually return to the calling function. Okay, so let's just jump right in and I'll show you how. So the return that we want is going to be equal to open parentheses, and in this we're going to do some string concatenation. Okay, so the first thing we want to do, let's look at our gender here. So we've got a gender and a pronoun value, right? And we do some formatting in here depending upon what the values are that have been entered. But we also need to, if we look here in Discord, we need to compile that to one line, okay? So I'm going to create a function up here underneath my pronouns setter, and we're going to call this def compile gender. Okay, and this is going to return us a string. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to check to see if the gender was actually set. Because if the gender wasn't set, there's no need to check for the pronouns, right? Because those are sequential. So if self.gender is NS, well, we're just going to return a blank string. Okay? But let's say that it's not. Let's say that the gender has been set. Okay, that's good. So our return is going to be equal to an F string. And we're going to say _gender with a colon and 2 more underscores to make it underlined. And then let's drop in self.gender, the property. Because remember, it does some handy formatting for us. Okay, that's awesome. We want that. But now we need to check our pronouns because we want to create one single line. Okay, but the user may not have entered pronouns. They may not have wanted to do that step. So if self.pronouns is not NS, so if they have set it, well, we're going to plus equal the return, and we're going to put an F string, space, 2 hyphens, another space. We're going to make this italic inside parentheses, and then we'll drop in self.pronouns like that, and parentheses and italics, okay? And then down here outside that if condition, we're going to add a new line to the return. Because regardless, we want this to drop down. So it's either going to be a blank string or something, and then we need to add a new line to that something and return it. Okay, and before we drop down to our compile and plug this in, let's do the same behavior for race and clan. Because again, these have some special behavior in the getters, and we want to compile both of those onto a single line. So def compile race clan, which will return a string. And ultimately, it's going to be similar behavior to the gender. So if self.race is ns, return an empty string. Otherwise, the return is going to equal an f string of _race. And then we'll drop in self.race, the property. And then if self.clan is not ns, then we want to format that in. So ret is plus equal to an f string of space, \space, and then self.clan. And then either way, we want to plus equal a new line into the return. And we're just going to return that. Now, even though the race, clan, and the gender are the only two sets of attributes that we want to combine to put on single lines, I want to keep our behavior similar so we don't confuse ourselves. So I want to create compile methods for the other properties as well, just to keep everything standard. So we're not defining some behaviors in a method and then defining some within the compile function. I just want to make sure that everything is similar. So under orientation, let's define def compile orientation. Okay, and this is going to return us a string. So if self.orientation is ns, return an empty string. Otherwise, let's return the formatted version of that. So an f string, and it's going to be a _orientation, and then self.orientation, like that, with a new line. Okay, and let's actually just copy this whole chunk here, because ultimately, this is what we're doing for the other three properties. Okay, so under formatted height, let's go ahead and add this. And we'll say compile height. If self.height is ns, we're not going to return anything. Otherwise, let's return height is self.formatted height. Be the same down here for the age. Let's drop this in. Like that. We'll compile age. Self.age is ns. And then instead of orientation, let's put age here and age here. Okay, and finally, we'll drop one in after the mare property as well. So this will be compile mare. Self.mare is ns. We're going to change orientation to friend ID. And self.mare in there as well. Okay, so that is looking good. Okay, so let's go down to our compile function here. Our raw string function, and now we can call those methods that we created. Okay, so self.compileGender plus, we're not using commas, this isn't a tuple, we want to concatenate strings, so we're using plus signs, self.compileRaceClan plus self.compileOrientation plus self.compileHeight plus self.compileAge plus self.compileMare. Okay, awesome. So this is ultimately our field value, right? So the last thing we need to do is draw a separator. But it's very possible that the user didn't input any of these. And if they did, then we don't want a blank separator. And we don't want a separator in a blank field, right? That would be none of this, and it would just be at a glance with a separator. Okay, we don't want that. So what I want to say here is if ret. So since each of these returns a string value, if all of them have returned empty strings, we're ultimately going to have an empty string in our return. And an empty string evaluates to false. So I can say if ret, or if it's not false, then I want to say ret plus equals draw separator with an extra of 15. Okay, so now we're adding our separator if this field has any value in it. Okay, and then we can just return the return. Great, now let's jump down here to compile now that our raw string is created. And in compile, so we have we could potentially have an empty string here. And if we do, we don't draw the separator, but ultimately we're going to return a string, whether it's empty or whether it's filled with some or all of the properties and a separator or what. Okay, so we can do this same check, if return, here. So if not self.rawString, we can just return, because we don't need to return an embed field if there's no info to put in the field. But on the in the event that our string does have value in it, we want to return an embed field, and the name is going to be equal to an f string. And in here we're going to type bot emojis, which we haven't imported. So let's jump up to the top, and we'll say from assets import star. Okay, and we'll jump back down. So bot emojis dot eyes dot value. And then outside of the curly braces, underscores, at a glance, double underscore there, and then another bot emojis.eyes.value. Okay, and then for the value of the embed field, we've already generated it, right? It's right here, self.rawString, raw string. And we don't want it to be inline, so that's false. Okay, so this is how we're going to return our at a glance class and section. Very cool. So now that we have the behavior defined in all of the subsections of the profile, let's go into the actual profile class itself. And down here at the bottom, we can define a compile function here for the main profile. So let's say def compile. This is just not going to take any parameters. And what I want this to return is a tuple of an embed and an optional embed. Okay, so let's import these all at the top real quick. So we need embed from Discord, and we need tuple from typing. And again, typing is getting kind of long, so let's drop it down. Very nice. Okay. So this tuple that we're returning is ultimately the embed of the profile and the embed of the about me if the user's created an about me. Okay, so that's what our return value is here. And the first thing I want to do is I want to start by getting all of those data points that we processed and made look pretty in the classes. So let's grab the details first. So let's say color, let's see, what was the order of the details that we exported? Character name, URL, color, jobs, rates. So char name, URL, color, jobs, rates field equals self.details.compile. Okay? And that dumps that tuple into these values that we've created here. Super handy way of defining stuff. I love it. Okay, let's do the same with at a glance. So at a glance equals self.ataglance.compile. Easy. Let's do the same with personality. Likes, dislikes, personality, about me equals self.personality.compile. And then thumbnail, main image, additional images equals self.images.compile. Okay, so now we've got all of our sections all made. That's pretty exciting. Much easier than expected, right? So a couple things that we need to do. We're going to be using this function to both compile the user's profile for previewing purposes and for posting purposes. Okay? Now when the user posts their profile, we're going to have some checks in place to make sure that their character name is present. Okay? And that they have like a color set. Just very, very few things that are required, but we're going to have checks that indicate whether those things are required before posting. Okay? But if you're previewing it, like we're about to do in this situation, we may not have some of the important data. So like the character name might not have been set by the time the user previews their profile. It's a possibility. So let's say if char name is NS, then let's reset the character name to an F string of character name, and we'll put NS here because that will come in as not set. Okay, so ultimately we're if we didn't do this, the name at the top of the profile would just be not set, and the user wouldn't fully understand why there's a value not set there. I mean, it's intuitive, but we don't want to assume our users know anything. So in the event that it's not set, we're going to change this to character name not set, so that the user has some kind of indication of why there's a not set value there. Okay, and then down here I want to make an elif statement. Okay, so if the character's name is not NS, which means they've set it, well, then in that event, I want to check elif URL is not NS. Okay, so this is if the character's name has been set and a URL has been submitted, then we want to format the title a little bit, okay? Because this doesn't indicate to us that there's an underlying URL, and in this particular case, there's not. But what I want to do is I want to say that the character name is now equal to an F string, and let's drop in bot emojis, which we haven't imported. So before I continue, let's go up here and above from utilities, let's say from assets, import star. Okay, and then we can go back down here to bot emojis dot envelope dot value, and then let's put in the name, or excuse me, the character name, and then add another emoji. So bot emojis dot envelope dot value. Okay, so if there's no URL and the character name is set, well, that's fine. But if there's a URL, we want to indicate by putting that cute little heart envelope emoji on either side that there is something that can be gained by clicking on the user's name. We want to bring the viewer's eye to that. Okay, so let's instantiate an empty string called description. Excuse me. We're going to instantiate a variable, and it's going to be called description, and the value will be embed.empty. Okay, because we want to be able to pass this ultimately into the embed. Okay, and now we want to deal with our jobs, because right now our jobs field is our jobs value, is just a string. So what do we want to do with that? Well, if you look back at our profile, we've got a couple of separators on either side of the jobs, right? So let's go ahead and take care of that. So if jobs is not NS, in the event that there are jobs, then we do want to add those separators and format it appropriately. Okay, so we can say description is now equal to, let's throw in an F string, and we'll do draw separator. And the text for the separator is going to be jobs. Okay, and we'll put a new line after that. An F string here, and we'll put jobs with a new line. And let's just copy this one from above and put it below, because it's the same behavior. Okay, very cool. So now let's build our fields, because the character name, as you can see, appears here at the top. Jobs appears next, and then we've got all of our fields to take care of. Okay, so let's do that. Let's instantiate a list called fields, and it's a list of embed field. And this is going to be equal to an empty list. Let's import embed field up here. And then ultimately, I'm just going to have an if statement for each field that we've generated up here in our compile behavior. And if the field exists, then we're going to add it. Otherwise, we're going to ignore it. So if at a glance is not none, none, fields.pend at a glance. Okay. Same thing with rates. If rates is not none, fields.append rates. Okay, we're going to do this with each field. So if likes is not none, this is rates field, rates field. If likes is not none, fields dot append likes. If dislikes is not none, fields dot append dislikes. If personality is not none, fields dot append personality. And then finally, if additional images is not none, well, if we look back over here, we want to make sure that this separator is drawn below our additional images, right? However, if we look in our images class and we compile, where's our compile additional? There it is. We're not adding a separator in here because we didn't need that for the status message. Okay, that's fair. And we want to make this function as malleable as possible. So I'm going to leave the separator out from within this function, and I'm actually going to add it here in the compile behavior. Okay, so all we need to do here is say additional images.value plus equals draw separator. Oops, draw separator with an extra of 15. And actually this needs to be within an F string, excuse me, because I also want to put a new line at the front. Okay, so we don't want to add the separator at the very end of the final line of images. We want to make a new line and then add those. Okay, so it'll be plus equals an F string with a new line and then draw separator. Okay, and then we can just say fields.append additional images. And that's how we've generated all the fields. Okay, so that was way too easy, right? That can't possibly be all there is to it. Well, honestly, there is. Let's go ahead and then just make the main profile now. And this is going to be equal to our good and trusty make embed command. Okay, let's just drop the stuff in where it needs to go. So the color is going to be equal to the color. Title is equal to the character name. Description is equal to the description that we defined up here, up above with the jobs. URL is going to be equal to the URL if URL is not ns, else embed.empty. URL, there we go. And then thumbnail URL is going to be equal to the thumbnail. Main image, or image URL, excuse me, is going to be equal to the main image. And then our fields, you guessed it, are going to be equal to the fields that we generated here. Okay, and that's it. Our very last step is to return the main profile and the about me. Because remember, we made that little guy up here. We didn't forget about him. So let's return both of those at the end. And now we have our compile function. This is great. This is looking really good. So let's put it to the test. Let's see if everything that we've done this far has created us a profile. Let's go into our profiles cog, and we'll create a new function down here above the setup function at profiles.command. The name is going to be equal to preview. Preview. Let's set our description equal to preview your current profile. Duh. And then we'll say async def profile preview. We'll take a CTX as we always do and have no return. And for this, as usual, we want to grab these two lines. Those two lines are always going to be identical in all of our commands for the time being. And then let's call that compile command. So main profile about me equals profile.compile. And then for the time being, this is not the way we're going to do this, but I want to test right away and make sure that all of the things that we just did are working. All of the compile behaviors are working, because if we keep going and something ends up being broken, it's going to be a little bit more confusing to fix. So for the time being, I'm going to create a list of embeds that we're going to attach to this response that we're creating here. And I'm going to start by setting it equal to the main profile, because remember, about me could be none. And if we include a list of embeds with a none value, we're going to get an error. So if about me is not none, then embeds.append about me. And then finally, we want to say await ctx.respond embeds plural equals the embeds list that we just made. And now we should be good to test. So let's hit the play button and see what happens. Okay. Let's say preview. And we're in business. There we go. Okay, and it looks like There's one thing I want to address really quickly, though. It looks like we have an extra new line here at the end of our additional images. So we could do one of two things to fix that. So let's go back here really quickly, and we'll stop our bot. And what I'd like to do is I'm going to go to the profile, and I'm going to remove the F string here around draw separator. Okay, because within our images class, when we compile the additional, our final image has a new line after it. Okay, and that's good. We could potentially come down here and say images.text.strip, and then we can add a new line as part of the draw separator here. But, excuse me, here. But I feel like just taking away the F string and adding the draw separator here is perfectly fine. So let's run really quickly and make sure that that still works. Okay, and that looks much better. No extra space in the additional images. But otherwise, it's looking really, really nice. This is good. Okay. So I think I'm going to stop the video here for now. We've got our compilation behavior done, and that was a big step. It means that we finally have a finished product that we are ready to, in the next video, post to Discord. And in our posting step, we're going to look at logging that posting URL, doing some checks to make sure that all the right information, all the required information is present in the profile. And then we'll also talk about updating the post if the user makes alterations to their profile. So it's going to be a good time, but it is going to require another video. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.